Welcome everybody to our very first episode of Mitch and Brad's Movie Show. I am so excited. Thank you to everybody for joining us from our old show, Life Imitating Movies, which we took offline, we retooled, we made it better. So here we are again. We're out with a new show, a new format, and I'm so excited because we finally have movies coming back, and that was something that we kind of dealt with a little bit on Life Imitating Movies. We were kind of short on new content to talk about, but now we have so much. We have so many movies to talk about, and I can't wait to get started. So Brad, what are you looking forward to with this new iteration of our show?
With our last show, we were kind of pigeonholed into finding news stories every week. So I like that this week we're just talking about movies. This show is just straight up movies, and I like that. I like that we've retooled it to go that route because we got sick of talking about the newest candy bars coming out every week. So now it's just focused purely on movies.
Yeah, and there wasn't still tons of good news floating around last year either. So we're kind of off that subject. We're talking about just our love of cinema, all these great new movies coming out, some classic ones as well. We talk about every single era of film, and it's great, it's engaging, and it's just something that we like to talk about with people. So feel free to engage with us, leave comments, leave likes, do whatever you want on YouTube, do all the YouTube things, and then feel free to check us out on social media as well. The links will be in the description down below. Just engage with us. Let us know what you want to see, if you're excited, if you hated movies that came out that we liked, and we'll just hopefully spark a good discussion coming up here. So let's get right into our kind of opening question that we pose to ourselves and the audience to start off our first episode here, which is obviously our episode here is going to be very superhero, very Spider-Man themed. So to give you a little bit of a preview for what we got in store today, but our opening question that we kind of asked ourselves and the viewers is, what superhero do you hope to see in a movie someday? And, I like to think I'm a little bit more of the superhero aficionado between the two of us, but, I'll let you kind of start off. What was your kind of answer for this?
That's the thing. I'm not really steeped in superhero cult. I know the main ones. I don't really get too bogged down with all of them. So the only thing I could think of with this question was from Batman, Mask of the Phantasm. I would like to see Phantasm brought into one of these real life Batman movies, especially with the one coming up, which looks like more realistic. I think you could do a really dark take on that Phantasm character in one of these live action movies.
No, I 100% agree with you. We've talked about this before on our other show or just offline, just between the two of us, where Batman Mask of the Phantasm is a fantastic animated Batman movie that actually did hit theaters back in the day when it came out. So it is a theatrical release, and it is a movie, big screen, whatever you want to categorize it as. But it is really a dark kind of take, as if Batman wasn't dark enough, but a dark kind of take on his backstory and this new villain that comes to town. And I think it would be a really compelling story if they brought that to the big screen, the Phantasm, and it would have a really great looking costume and some great visual effects. And then you throw the Joker in there with this particular story as well from the animated movie. And it just, yeah, I'm surprised that they just haven't looked at that and said, hey, this was popular back in the day. Let's just make a live action version of it.
I think one day we will see some iteration of Phantasm in these movies. I think somebody eventually is going to tap into it because there's only so many times we can see the Joker. There's only so many times we can see Penguin. There's only so many times Catwoman can make a reappearance before they're like, hey, these animated shows, like, Harley Quinn was an animated show character that they tapped into and now is one of the bigger characters in the DC universe. So there's definitely a ton of untapped potential with the animated series and with the Phantasm movie.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, I 100% hope that I can see a live action Batman adaptation, whether it's a TV show or a movie, because the TV shows are getting higher budgets now, especially with superhero shows. And you got a couple new spin-offs coming to HBO Max based on Matt Reeves's Batman universe. So, you never know. We could get Phantasm in a show, movie, what have you. So I would just like to see more of the character someday. I think we'll get that eventually sometime. So 100% agree with your answer. And for mine, even though I 100% agree with yours and it's a good answer, the person I picked I'd like to see in a movie someday, because I don't think we've really seen enough of him, is Batman. You know, I don't think we've really got. So no, I'm joking. We've got plenty of Batman adaptations, but I was gonna say my pick actually for this is a superhero by the name of Booster Gold. And for people who might not be familiar, Booster Gold is a DC Comics superhero. And essentially, he's a time traveler who wants to be a superhero for fame and notoriety. So he's from the far future. He actually is a janitor at a museum for superheroes of the past, gets inspired, steals some time travel stuff and some equipment, some superhero things, and goes back into the past to our modern 21st century to try to be a superhero and get famous. And, you know, it sounds like that concept just kind of writes itself. Like this could be DC's version of Deadpool, just a wisecracking, time-traveling superhero that just beats up bad guys but doesn't really do it to be heroic. He does it for personal gain and for personal reasons. So I feel like, again, this is something on the table that if people just took a look at and said, you know what, this would be really easy to translate to live action, I think people would really catch on to this character.
Yeah, that's one I've never heard of before, but it sounds pretty cool. Time traveling just for fame, and I think you could get some good Is it a comedic? You mentioned Deadpool, so I assume it's more of a comedic character.
He is definitely a little bit of a comedic superhero, excuse me. And to add to that, he has a quirky, backsassing robot that he takes with him as well, named Skeets, that kind of is like his AI's artificial intelligence that kind of flies around him and, you know, kind of answers all his questions and kind of helps him with the time travel stuff and his gear and all these different things. So it just... If you want to look up some Booster Gold stuff, I would definitely recommend watching the old Justice League cartoon from the 90s, Justice League Unlimited. Actually, just Justice League Unlimited, because he wasn't in just Justice League, because that was just the 7 core members. But go back and watch that show. There are definitely some funny moments, some funny episodes with him, and I think kind of embody the character really well since, again, he's not really somebody that we've really seen in a lot of adaptations yet.
Yeah, never seen him in anything, never heard of him, but I am interested in a robot named Skeets. Just Booster and Skeet. Yeah, when I saw Booster on your thing, I was originally thinking of the character from Jingle All the Way. Booster was Rocket Man's sidekick. I was like, wait, he wants to see more Booster?
That's actually Turbo Man.
Yeah.
I don't know how you forgot that, because Jingle All the Way, they say take a shot every time you hear Turbo Man in that movie, because he's just, you know, thrown at everybody, thrown at the screen. It just, you know, it's just, that's a holiday classic I love watching to this day too.
Yeah, I'll hang my head in shame. I should have. I just bought a pop too, of Turbo Man pop, and I completely biffed on that name. Yeah, what are you gonna do? This is the first episode. I'll get better.
Yeah, so obviously lots of superhero movie adaptations coming out. So there's always hope that we would kind of see some of our personal favorites on the screen. So, you know, maybe someday.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, instead of rebooting things we've seen a million times, even though Batman looks phenomenal, yeah, they do got to start getting into their deep roster. But see, when they get into their deep roster, you kind of get like a Birds of Prey, which was decent, not great, with characters you didn't really know. And a lot of these second-tier movies don't really do that well, because it's just like Shang-Chi didn't do it. It did pretty good business, but it didn't, like Spider-Man right now is blowing up. It's a billion dollar movie. Shang-Chi, I think, did pretty good business, but I don't think you got your general audience out to the theaters with that, because not very name recognition-y.
Very true. So maybe someday we'll see some of these lesser known characters on the big screen. All right, so our main segment of the day, obviously, like we said up top, very Marvel, very Spider-Man superhero-centric episode, kind of to tie everything together with a similar theme, nice little bow on it. So our main segment today, we're asking ourselves and our viewers, what are your top 3 MCU movies, as opposed to Marvel movies, which could cover things like the 2000s X-Men, the Blade series, all these other kind of things that haven't been part of the MCU or produced by Marvel Studios. So I'll let you start off. I have my top three, and I like that we kind of differ a little bit. And that's the point of this, is to kind of have a discussion, and everyone has their personal favorites and their own top three, top five, top 10, whatever it is. So I like that we kind of pick different ones and that we like different movies in the MCU, even though there aren't a million to pick from.
I agree. I mean, I have spent a lot of time over researching the MCU movies recently. And, you know, we did a YouTube video for this other thing I write for, Joe Blow Movie Network, and I got in the YouTube comments for that, I got a lot of crap for my top pick, but I stand by it. For my number 3 movie, I went with the original MCU movie, which was Iron Man, because that was the original first entry in the MCU. If that movie tanks, you have no MCU. That movie relied everything. 20 years, $20 billion worth of grosses relies on one movie. And it relied on Robert Downey Jr., who at that point had fallen out of Hollywood grace. You know, Jon Favreau, the director, had to kind of really fight for Robert Downey Jr. in the movie, even putting up, I believe, his own insurance, I believe, to get Robert Downey Jr. in the movie. You have all that, plus the movie just was great from the get-go, but the after credit scene, which became, now people sit in the movies at the end of every movie. People are sitting in the theater for every movie. So MCU really changed movie watching, but that after credit scene with Sam Jackson wasn't in critic review copies. That only came with the first week prints. It was only there. It was there for the audience to say, we're kicking something off, which I kind of liked. I liked that they kept that little sting for just the audiences, just the fans who are coming out for Iron Man. I really enjoyed that, and I remember seeing that in theaters, because I did see Iron Man before it came out in theaters, and then I went back and saw it just because I heard that they had put that little extra stinger in, so I had to go back and see it a second time.
Yeah, I'll be honest, like a lot of people, I did see Iron Man in theaters when it came out in the 2000s, but like a lot of other people, it wasn't really the standard back then to stay after the credits. So I didn't really see the Nick Fury thing until I kind of saw it on Blu-ray at home. And I still kind of had to look it up because it just, you know, again, this wasn't really a character that everyone was super familiar with that kind of knew what this meant. They maybe knew Avengers when he kind of said that in the little post-credit scene, but not a lot of people forget, not a lot of people were really familiar with Iron Man, with Nick Fury, with a lot of these characters that the MCU kind of made popular, because believe it or not, you know, these characters no one really cared about because they Marvel fans and, you know, just casual comic book fans, or people who knew about superheroes would just mostly know about Spider-Man or some of the X-Men or some of the really popular ones. So believe it or not everyone really knew to stay for the credit scene and knew who these characters were.
Exactly. Yeah, I remember it was. He said, you know, there's some sort of Avenger initiative, and I had to turn to the person I was with who knew more about it, and I was like, what is an Avenger? So, I mean, you think about that, that was 2008, I believe, so 13 years ago, nobody knew what an Avenger was, and now Avengers is the highest grossing film of all time, Avengers Endgame. So it's crazy the arc these things have gone on, and you can't. I think Kevin Feige, man, he deserves something like an Oscar or something, because it did change movie going, and it was the baby of Kevin Feige. He wasn't the first to do an interconnected universe, because I'm going to give Kevin Smith that credit. The Viewisk universe, he had all those interconnected movies back in the early 90s, but Feige was the first one to say, we can do this on a massive scale. And they have. I mean, look at Spider-Man, man. Spider-Man, $1 billion movie right now. It's insane.
Yeah, so speaking of Spider-Man, you know, I couldn't help but notice when you kind of sent over these notes for today's show that you had Spider-Man No Way Home at number 2 on your top 3 MCU movies, and it's always controversial to put a recent entry on the top of a list of movies that's been around for 10, 15 years. So let me hear the reasoning behind that.
So yeah, we won't go too deep into it because we're going to review it later, but I honestly, you kind of have to put in theater experience. You have to put in anticipation, and you have to put in just it. It was a great movie. I sat there glued to the screen the entire time. People in my theater, it was a packed theater, and in these days that gave me pause. I almost didn't go because it was a sold out movie, but I double masked it and went to the theater. And the audience interaction with it, sometimes it can get on my nerves. If people like clap too loud or do all that crap, because I'm like, sometimes I'm just like, we get it. We get it. But with this movie, man, the audience interaction, it really added to it, man. When people come on the screen clapping, I did have a guy sitting next to me who was like having seizures with how excited he was. Was that just for attention from like the people around him? Probably, but still. And so yeah, it did jump up because again, I really liked the way they did it. I love the way they brought all of the other Spider-Man movies into this one. I thought that was incredibly creative. I thought it was really awesome. It made me happy. It is one I will watch over and over again. And so it did jump up to my number 2 spot because it was just that good.
Very well said. So, like you said, we'll kind of cover it a little bit more later in the episode here, kind of dive in depth to it. Obviously, a lot of people have a lot of things to say about Spider-Man No Way Home. So we'll kind of do a deep dive into that. But let's hear your number 1, your top 3 MCU movies, your number 1 pick.
So my number 1 movie, and this was apparently controversial when I did it for the other channel, Joe Blow. I don't know why this was controversial, but perhaps because we'll see, it didn't make your top 3, but mine was Avengers Endgame, because it was the culmination of what, 21, 22 movies brought together. They stuck the landing. I thought they ended it on an incredibly emotional, Robert Downey, Iron Man dies to save the world. Awesome. But then even on top of that, you knew Chris Evans's Captain America was going away. You knew he wasn't going to play the role anymore. And so everybody's like, well, they're just going to kill both characters? Because if they kill both characters, it would be like, all right, we get it. You went a little overkill with that. But I love the way they did that. They had him do the time stone, and he went back and he got to live his life with, was it Peggy Carter? So he got to live his full life with Peggy Carter, and then he comes back an old man sitting on that bench, and he passes the shield onto Anthony Mackie, and I thought that almost hit me more emotional than Iron Man's death. But then with Iron Man's death, you have that freaking awesome scene that weaves through the funeral with all the people in the scene. I think that's probably one of, if not the best scene in the entire MCU, because it's just a perfect encapsulation of all 20 movies or 21 movies, whatever it was at that time. And it worked as a conclusion. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
No, I think you're right. I think people really underestimate how many balls this movie was juggling in the air. You had to send off the original characters tastefully. You had to leave the door open for these new characters for their spin-offs. You had to create a satisfying story, not just for the 20 plus movies before this one, but for the movie itself. This singular movie, you still had to create a good story, not just fan service for everything that came before it. And I think you're right. I think it balanced everything really well, like kind of against all odds, because yeah, it was a massive success and people really love it, but it could have not been as good as it was. And I don't think it was perfect, because I don't really think any movie's perfect, but it was still, for an MCU fan, you were probably like me. You were probably watching that in the theater with a big, dumb smile on your face at some of these moments and these big battles and the endings for certain characters. And you're just kind of looking at it like a little kid, just really enjoying everything that they laid out for you, especially if you followed along the journey of all these characters.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah. I mean, it was, and it does help that Infinity War ended with such a cliffhanger. Granted, was it a cliffhanger if you know movies? Because if you know movies, you knew everybody was coming back because you just knew they were already advertising a new Spider-Man movie at that point. So you're like, well, all right, obviously Spider-Man comes back, but it was interesting to see. It's kind of like when a spoiler happens. Like, let's say somebody tells you, oh, this person dies in that movie. And you're like, oh, why'd you tell me that person dies? But when you watch it, you're still surprised at how they die. So you still get, even though it was spoiled that so-and-so dies, you still get that like, oh, okay. And that's what an Endgame did really well, which you knew they were coming back, but how they came back was like, oh, I like that. Very well done. And the battle scenes were awesome. And I feel like, it didn't just feel like a conclusion of the Avengers. It felt like an additional Iron Man movie. It felt like another Black Panther movie. It felt like an additional Thor movie. It felt like a sequel to all of the movies leading up to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I definitely think that's a good top three. And, that's going to be a little bit of a good transition into mine because you didn't have Infinity War on yours, but I do on mine. It's not at number three. We'll kind of get to that in a second. But I wanted to kind of start off and say that my third favorite MCU movie is actually Black Panther. And I know some people might think this is a little bit controversial, but I thought when I saw it, when I finally did get to see it, because it was like Avengers or Spider-Man No Way Home, where it was so tough to find a ticket when this movie came out. And it just showed you how popular it was with people. And when I finally did see it in theaters, I think it was the breath of fresh air that the MCU needed at the time, where you had this character that you got a glimpse of in Civil War, but got his own movie and you got to see him stretch out his acting ability a little bit more. Obviously, the late, great Chadwick Boseman unfortunately lost him too soon, but this movie was obviously covering things that were from a different corner of the Marvel world. And what can you really say about Michael B. Jordan's performance as a villain as well? Easily, people kind of hold him up as a top three, top five, what have you, MCU villain. And I think this was really a good breath of fresh air at the time that the MCU needed, and that, was really original and kind of covered a different corner that we hadn't seen before.
I do like Black Panther. I do think it's slightly overrated. But having said, I still love it, but I do think there are certain movies that get overpraised, and I think that's one of them. Even though I genuinely enjoy it, and I do believe Michael B. Jordan's villain performance in it is definitely top three in the Marvel universe. I rank Michael Keaton probably my favorite because I really liked Keaton's villain performance. I put Black Panther in my top 10 without a shadow of a doubt in the MCU, but it was very good. There's a speech Michael B. Jordan gives about he would rather be killed than put in prison like his forefathers brought over to our country, talking about slavery and stuff, which I think is one of the best written lines in the MCU. One of real deep line. Was directed by Ryan Coogler, who is legitimately one of my favorite filmmakers of recent time. The guy who did Creed, he did Fruitvale Station. I mean, the guy is incredibly talented and a phenomenal writer and director. I say it's overrated, but it's still in my top 10. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes that happens. Like Spider-Man No Way Home right now. People are going to see it's $1 billion movie. Everybody's loving it. There's going to be people who are like, that movie wasn't that good. Yeah, and I'm kind of that person for Black Panther.
That's fair. You can't please everybody. So I guarantee you there are some people who didn't like Spider-Man No Way Home or didn't like Black Panther. Or some people are really, apathetic, really love it. But, that's, movies are a form of art and art is subjective. So, everyone has their own opinion. So my number 2 MCU movie is going to be Avengers Infinity War. So that's where that kind of falls on my top 3, kind of covering both of these kind of tail end Avengers movies here that kind of wrapped up the Infinity Saga, as they call it. So Infinity War, I really liked it because not only was this, again, the first part of a culmination of everything that came before it, and you really got to see all these cool interactions between characters who haven't met each other yet, that they exchange all these different lines of dialogue, where it was just really cool to see, not only as an MCU fan, but as a comic book fan, to get to see these different characters interact for the first time on screen together. But I really liked it because the good guys actually lost in this one. And, it's like you said earlier, you knew that characters were coming back and Spider-Man already had a movie trailer out, and you knew the good guys were going to somehow win eventually, but they left it without too much hope at the end. And I kind of give them credit for that, for taking that risk, for actually saying, hey, the good guys lost on this one, that they don't just always win and go home and save the day and that's it, and there's no fallout or consequences, that they actually took a weighty, risk on this one.
I agree. I mean, and this was the one where I had put Endgame at number 1, and I had put Infinity War a little lower in my other list, and I got raked over the coals for that, man. I mean, I wasn't expecting how bad people would take that, but everybody seemed to say Infinity War. The internet consensus seems to be Infinity War is the best of the MCU movies. And I can't fault that. It is phenomenal. And I do like the villain. I think Thanos is a good villain. I think Josh Brolin is a tremendous actor. And I also I liked his reasoning. Like, Thanos, if you break down why he was a villain, yeah, he wanted to destroy half of life on Earth, but it was for the preservation of Earth. It was for the preservation of the planet, to kill 50% of the population in order to save the other 50%. Can you argue, is that bad? I don't want to, if I was one of the ones who survived, I'm good with it, but,
Yeah, I think it's an interesting moral kind of conversation that people have when they talk about this movie too, because obviously it's been dissected to the nth degree, but people just love to talk about it. They love to talk about what happened. They love to talk about, was Thanos right, wrong? It just, a lot of discussions can stem from this movie. So with that, I'll move on to my number 1 pick. And I think this definitely cracks a lot of people's kind of top 3, top 5, maybe not number 1, but for me, it's number 1 in the MCU. And that's Captain America, the Winter Soldier. And I put this in number 1 because I think when you talk about a non-Avengers movie, that this has got to be the clear favorite. When people say, all right, outside of the Avengers, what's your favorite kind of solo MCU Marvel movie? And for me, this one, it has to take the cake because there's just so much to like about it. There's great action, probably the best storytelling out of any of the MCU movies. And the best part is anyone can kind of come off the street and watch this and not be totally lost. Obviously it connects to other stuff, but it's a great standalone movie where someone off the street who doesn't really follow the Marvel movies can just come in and watch it and enjoy it for what it is.
Yeah, I really liked Winter Soldier. And Winter Soldier, for me, I think it was the first one of the MCU movies that felt epic. Before that, you had your standalone, your Thor, your Captain America, the first Avenger, your Iron Man. They all felt they were kind of self-contained origin stories. And Captain America Winter Soldier was kind of the first one that felt like a true epic Avengers level style movie, which, to be fair, it was the first one that Anthony and Joe Russo had done. That was the first one they were brought in for. And I remember when they were first hired. I remember the internet, because they were most famously known for directing Community at that point. And so for comedy sitcoms and stuff. So, the internet interneted, and they were trashing all over them. Why would you hire sitcom people? Well, they went on to make some of they went on to form the MCU as it has been. And, you get the introduction of Anthony Mackie in that movie. And I remember, again, after that movie ended, I had to say, who is the Falcon? What is he? Because, again, I don't know. I'm not a comic book reader, so my my comic book knowledge really does come from these movies. And so, you finish it and you do the deep dive. You go to Wikipedia and you read for 30 minutes on who the Falcon is and where his trajectory goes. And I really like that it was a comic book movie, but it was really a government conspiracy movie, which I really dug. I really like government conspiracy movie. And you have Robert Redford in there, and he was like the head of S.H.I.E.L.D., I believe it was in that. And so it really played really well. It's like a throwback to like 1970s conspiracy theory type, movies like that with a blend of just superhero action.
Absolutely. And I don't think you could give enough credit to the Russo brothers for what they've done for the MCU. And again, I wasn't really a part of that crowd that kind of looked at that with trepidation when they were announced as the directors of The Winter Soldier or whatever other Marvel projects they would have worked on. Because I didn't really know Community. I knew of it. I knew it was a comedy show. I didn't really know that they were kind of the people behind it. But I think these days, especially with superhero movies, that you got to at least give the director, actor, whoever you're kind of skeptical about in a movie coming up, at least a little bit of, credit, or, at least just check out their project before you kind of form opinions about it. Because, we went through something like this recently with another example is Todd Phillips, who directed Joker back in 2019. And he's known for doing The Hangover. So it just, you never know what someone can accomplish, especially when they kind of try their hand at something new and kind of give like a little bit of a fresh look on a genre that they haven't approached yet, or just anything like that. So I think, it was important that people gave them a shot, and they certainly loved what they did with The Winter Soldier and the movies that they worked on after that. So I think people definitely came around to them after they saw a couple of these movies.
Without a doubt. And I wanted to give credit because I don't think enough credit goes to the writers of these movies. We always praise the directing and everything, but the people who craft these stories are the writers. So I did have to pull it up. And for, if you've noticed me looking away for a second, I had to pull it up because that kind of goes to my point. I didn't know their names off the top of my head. I knew Anthony and Joe Russo. I didn't know the writers' names. And so that's Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely. And I believe that they have been the writers. They had written, I believe, most of, or if not all, the Russo directed movies. And so you got to give a shout out to those two, because they crafted these stories. And without the scripts that they wrote, these movies aren't nearly as good as they are.
Absolutely. The writers are the real heroes. Without them, we wouldn't have a story. We wouldn't have the twists and turns, the ins and outs, the great characterization that we see on screen. So honestly, you could credit, even if the direction is bad and the story is great, you can always credit maybe a good or bad movie to the writers as well. It's just, I think one of these kind of key people on the staff of making a movie, like a director, writer, actor, that can make or break something. And I think you're definitely right that they don't really get enough credit from the mainstream audience, maybe.
Yeah, you never really see their names in the reviews. Reviews never really write about the writers. They always, which is weird. It's writers. You'd think the writers would want to give more credit to the writers, but you never really see their names or anything. And so you definitely want to throw them out there because, without a good story to launch off, you're not getting a good movie.
Very true. And I think especially given the task of intertwining all these different MCU movies together and all these different characters and plot threads and things down the road, things in the past, that, they definitely kind of stayed on top of it and maybe have a little bit of a tougher job than a writer on a one-off movie. It certainly presents an extra challenge given the MCU universe.
Without a doubt. And so, with these top three, our top threes or whatever, those really were, it felt like all of those were part of the first, Marvel breaks their things up into phases, but it feels like all the movies until Endgame were one phase. It feels like everything built up for that. And so now we're seeing the second part of the MCU, because now what are they building towards? You've had Eternals, you've had Shang-Chi. Black Widow is more of a one-off, but it did introduce the Florence Pugh character, which is going to be, I believe, prevalent in the series. You had Spider-Man, obviously, just come out, and that it did feel more self-contained if in the movie Spider-Man, which we'll get to in a little bit. So it's interesting to see where the next 15 years of Marvel Cinematic Universe is going to take us, because, Iron Man, I don't think is coming back. We will have a new Captain America. Obviously, Anthony Mackie's Captain America. Spider-Man's sticking around. I think they just announced a new trilogy for Spider-Man or whatever. So I am interested. It feels like Endgame bookended the first part of the Marvel series, and now we're into the second part.
No, definitely. I think it's going to be another interesting next 10 or 15 years of these movies coming out, because if you think they're slowing down anytime soon, then you're crazy, because it's only getting bigger with all these Marvel TV shows on Disney Plus, and they're just continuing to just pump out the movies of all these different characters that I guarantee you, if you weren't doing it enough before in the Infinity Saga, you looking up these characters on Wikipedia, you're certainly going to be doing that a lot more now with these maybe lesser known characters that they're going to base some of these movies and TV shows off of. So I'm looking forward to it too. It truly is an unprecedented cinematic sequence of events, and tying everything together and having this 20 plus movie story being told. And it just, even if you don't really like where the MCU has been, if you don't like where they're going or just what have you, it's really interesting to see from a film kind of history perspective, because no one's really done this before. So it's almost like every step that they take is uncharted territory, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of what they do and where they go with it.
Without a doubt, yeah. I mean, it's the only studio I can think of, maybe Pixar would be second, who hasn't had a major stumble. Our last kind of part of this first episode of Mitch and Brad's Movie Show, is going to be our movie review of Spider-Man No Way Home, which has become pretty zeitgeisty in terms of movie release, especially given the times we are in. It's the first movie of the pandemic era to hit $1 billion worldwide, which is insane. And so we'll just launch it. We'll just do our quick, did we like it? Did we not like it? And then we'll launch into a kind of a full review. But just a little bit of a forewarning here. This will go into spoiler territory for anybody watching or listening to this. So be prepared for that. If you haven't seen Spider-Man No Way Home, or if you haven't been on the internet in 2 weeks, I guess, because if you've been on the internet, this movie's spoiled for you. But if you don't know anything about Spider-Man No Way Home yet and you want to be completely in the dark, we hope you've enjoyed the previous part of this episode, and we'll see you next week. But for people who have seen the movie and are ready to dive into it, we will be talking about every aspect of this movie. So first and foremost, I guess, Mitch, good, bad, mediocre, where do you fall on this one?
Yeah, a lot of people, like you were talking about earlier, are saying this is already a top 10, 5, 3, whatever you want to call it, MCU movie for people who saw it and really liked it. So if I had to put a rough estimate on where this falls on my top MCU movies, I think I could fit it into the top 5. I'm not sure if I could do top 3, because we just talked about that. And I think I still need a little bit more time for this movie to settle in to determine where it falls, because I just saw it not too long ago, and it still needs to sink in like the other ones have that I've watched 50 times already. So I will say it is a top 5 for me in the MCU. It may go higher on my personal list. Don't know yet. Just need more time for it to sink in. But I really liked it. If you've been following along with the Marvel movies, if you've been following along with Tom Holland's Spider-Man, if you're just a Spider-Man fan in general, and we'll get into why in a second, but there was a lot to like about this. So again, a little bit of a spoiler warning here, but we're going to be taking a deep dive into it. And if you're watching a video about Spider-Man No Way Home and haven't seen it yet and want to, then what are you doing here? So let's get right into it. So diving into Spider-Man No Way Home, obviously everything that people are saying about this, and the thing that people most wanted to know going in, are Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire in this movie? And the answer is a resounding yes. And that's because they weren't just cameos, they were a full-on part of this movie. They were working with Tom Holland's Spider-Man. And if you liked either their Spider-Man before this iteration with Tom Holland, I mean, you had to like this movie, right? Just seeing the three of them interact together.
Yeah. I kept myself pretty blind to all the spoilers. I guess it was known that they were going to be in it, but I never looked it up, and I didn't know if they were in it or not. So when Andrew Garfield first comes on the screen, that was one of those times where my theater massively erupted into cheers. He comes through that little Doc Ock, or not Doc Ock, the little time portal, or whatever, the Doctor Strange portal. And so he steps through, the theater erupts, and you're like, right on. And exactly, when you heard all these people were in it, when you saw Doc Ock in the previews and all these people, you're like, all right, that's just going to be a little fan service cameo for everybody to go, yay. But Tobey Maguire and the villains of these movies were the main villains. They weren't just fan service. They were the main bad guys in this movie. Maguire and Garfield in this movie it was a three-headed monster in this movie. It wasn't just Tom Holland coming in and saving the day. All three of them had full story arcs. So it truly felt like a sequel. It felt like Spider-Man 4. It felt like The Amazing Spider-Man 3. And it felt like Spider-Man No Way Home.
Exactly. And it was actually really tough because going into the movie, of course, you hear all these rumors, but nothing was really confirmed going in when you're going in to see it, unless you really kind of crawl through the internet to try and find out if they were in it, if these other two previous Spider-Man were in it. You didn't know going in. So it was actually kind of tough for me. I wanted to find out if they were in it before I went to go see the movie. And it's because I was going to be, like a lot of people, really disappointed if they weren't, because it really seemed like that's what they were building up to. So I was kind of walking this tightrope the morning of going to see the movie, where I wanted to find out just if they were in it, so I wouldn't be disappointed if they weren't, without spoiling anything else in the movie for me. And that was a really fine line to walk, but I managed to find that out, that they were indeed. So I knew going in, so I just knew to expect them there, so I wouldn't be too let down if for some reason they weren't, or they were just a really brief cameo or just alluded to. But I did walk that tightrope, and I really, really enjoyed both of them in the movie. I think, like a lot of people are saying, I really liked Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man a lot better in this movie than I liked him in his own Spider-Man movies, which I thought was very strange, but that I really liked his performance. And I think maybe it kind of has to do with Andrew Garfield just coming into his own as an actor the last few years.
Probably. I mean, Garfield, I think, got the biggest applause in my theater. I don't know how it was in your theater, but when he saves MJ, when she falls, that got the biggest applause in my theater, because obviously in his movies, Gwen Stacy fell to her death, and he wasn't able to save her. So it became like a full circle moment for his Spider-Man, that he was able to save a falling MJ. And there were so many applause points in this movie. That one had the biggest, loudest, and longest in my theater.
Yeah, that was a wholesome moment. And I think, again, if you kind of thought they were, if you knew they were going to be in this movie going in, that you saw that shot in the trailer for the movie where, Tom Holland's Spider-Man is diving after MJ and she's falling off the rafters, you're like, they really seem like they're setting that up for Andrew Garfield to swoop in and save her. But again, it's like, if you didn't spoil the movie for yourself, if you didn't really know going in, you kind of thought maybe it looked like that's what they were setting it up for, but there was no way to be sure. So I'm glad that you could at least have some surprises with this movie, because that brings me to my next point, which is the internet didn't really seem to care about spoilers with this one. I saw so many articles, so many just people blatantly posting on social media, on Twitter, Facebook, all these different platforms, stuff from the movie. And I was so disappointed by that. Such a big release like this, and people just don't really seem to care about spoilers anymore.
Well, I guess the people are a-hole conversation may be another episode we do, not movie related, just people related. But I don't know. I don't get on social media very often, and I don't see people I don't see those types of spoilers very often. So sounds like you have some crappy friends on your feeds, just like spoiling movies.
It wasn't even friends so much as just random people on the internet. You know, you read an article, you see the comments, you see on Twitter, not even where you're searching for something, but you just accidentally come across something and somebody spoils something from the movie. And it just, you know, people who try to spoil others' enjoyment of a movie like that and try and spoil the surprise because this person found out first, that just, I don't really like that. And I would not want to do that to someone who, a movie that they're looking forward to, and spoil, even if it's a tiny moment. It's just, it's better to see that on the screen for the first time, fresh, without anyone spoiling it for you in advance. So I like to just kind of say to people, like, if you think about doing that in the future, just please reconsider. Just, how would you like it again if somebody did it to you on a movie that you were much looking forward to, and you saw had something spoiled for you, and you didn't get to see a movie with fresh eyes? So just please, in the future, just think about spoilers twice.
It's not just, yeah, I guess it is, but it's like once a movie gets released, even like big publications like Entertainment Weekly, their like main headline is like, "Oh my God, I can't believe blank showed up," and you're just like, all right, well, you get that's a spoiler, right? Like, horrible writer from this big publication that people like. The movie's been out a day, you know. Maybe don't put blank shows up in this movie, because that makes me anticipate them. It makes me anticipate something. Like, my biggest pet peeve for like articles on the internet is like, oh, we got to break down that shocking ending to this movie. It's like a day, the movie came out yesterday, now they're saying this shocking ending. So now, before I even get a chance to see it, I know that there's a big twist ending. Can't stand that, because I sit there anticipating and trying to figure out what a shock ending is going to be, rather than just taking it in as I watch the movie.
Exactly. I 100% agree, but enough about us ranting about spoilers. Let's get back to No Way Home. So this, time it back into the Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield conversation. This was what I was afraid of going into this movie, was that Sony just kind of looked at the success of Into the Spider-Verse and they just said, you know what, let's just do a live action adaptation of that and just make some money. And I'm very glad that this wasn't that. You know, we weren't just having Andrew Garfield, Tobey Maguire, these other villains. They weren't just thrown in there with no characterization, with no advancement in their story, with no satisfying action. They very much actually took care in building this movie, and I really appreciate that they really didn't just try and mimic Into the Spider-Verse and just make a live-action adaptation like of that they really took good care with this movie and really took the best parts of Into the Spider-Verse, really, where they took the heart and the morals behind the Spider-Man character and really applied them to this movie, and I really applaud them for that.
Yeah, I agree with that, because yeah, you delve into a multiverse and everything, you can pretty much do whatever you want. So I do like that they didn't go crazy with it. Like Into the Spider-Verse, you know, you had Spider-Ham, you had, you know, Spider-Man Noir, you had all these crazy characters and stuff, and they could have went off the rails with this if they did that, but I like that it was just, we're bringing in all three legacy movies, all three legacy villains, or two previous legacy series, and they kept it contained to that, and it obviously paid off. I mean, if you remember, this movie almost didn't happen. After Far From Home came out, Sony and Disney couldn't reach a deal. So they were going to go their separate ways, and Spider-Man was going to be out of the MCU. And apparently it happened where Tom Holland like made a phone call like at the 11th hour to a Sony president or something like that, and got the deal kind of done to bring them in. And I'd say Sony doesn't regret that decision, considering this is now Sony's highest grossing movie of all time. So, you know, a lot of interesting backroom facts about like these movies. And so it's just interesting that we could have never seen a conclusion to that insane cliffhanger from Far From Home. And I think, like with Endgame or whatever, they stuck the landing. That cliffhanger and Far From Home led to this movie, and this movie gave an insanely satisfying continuation, conclusion, whatever you want to call it, to that story.
Absolutely. So, I really liked how, again, tying it back to the three Spider-Men, that again, they weren't just cameos. They weren't just exchanging funny quips and bits of dialogue, and that was it. They did do that, and some of it was funny, some of it wasn't. Typical MCU Marvel movies. Some of the jokes are funny, and some of them fall completely flat. But I really liked how they learned from each other. They really had shared experiences that they told each other about, and really, it felt like a human connection between the three of them. That they weren't just three versions of the same person. They weren't three totally different people, that they really had a lot of stuff that they shared and talked with each other about. And I really, again, that heart to heart, that hard aspect of this movie, I really appreciated that. And the fact that, at the end of the movie where Tom Holland's Spider-Man is swinging through New York City in the snow, that he has the new, more classic looking red and blue suit inspired by the other Spider-Man. And that was just a really wholesome comic book fan moment right there. And I really appreciated that as well.
Yeah. I agree with that. And then to kind of we'll delve into some of these other spoilery type moments. So let's get into Aunt May's death. I guess you kind of knew that was coming or something, but it was still a big gut punch moment or whatever. So I'm a huge fan of Marissa Tomei, so it sucks that we're not getting any more Marissa Tomei in the MCU. But it played really well, and Tom Holland really showed his acting there, because I mean that was I think everybody in the theater was doing these during that scene.
So I'll ask you then: did you tear up? Did you cry when Aunt May died in the movie?
I mean, you always get a little moist. You always get a little moisty eyelids at those moments, yeah. And it helps again that Tom Holland sold that moment really well. Like, his acting was really phenomenal in that moment, and she gave the Ben Parker with great power comes great responsibility. She gave that, and then she dies. Sucked.
Yeah, it was a really emotional moment, and I will say that it didn't quite get me. It didn't, make me cry, maybe teared up a little bit, but I will say you're right. Tom Holland's acting definitely kind of helped sell that moment a little bit, but it was a little funny because for me, it kind of reminded me of Age of Ultron, earlier movie in the MCU, where they kind of set up the whole thing, different moments throughout the movie, like it's going to be a Hawkeye snuff film, but instead Quicksilver gets killed. And to me, that kind of reminded me of this, where it seemed like to me while watching it, they were almost kind of setting up the whole thing for Zendaya's MJ to get killed off. She was going to die at the hands of a villain, and it was going to motivate Tom Holland, but instead they kind of pulled a switcheroo, and it was Aunt May instead. So that definitely kind of reminded me that little parallel there, but that was a good emotional moment. And I think, again, it ties into this movie is very emotional, not just between the three Spider-Man, but how Tom Holland's Spider-Man relates to the people that he cares about and the villain's motivations. There is a lot of emotion to this movie. It's not just punching and superhero action.
I fully agree. I mean, it was a good 2.5 hours of it was a self-contained movie, in that the villains in this movie weren't, it's not like a Thanos or whatever, where the villain is going to be spread across multiple movies. This was bringing back your Doc Ock, your Green Goblin, and all them. And with that segue, I'll say Willem Dafoe's performance in this movie, for me, was Oscar worthy. That dude was freaking awesome in this movie. That dude plays a psycho better than I think anybody can play a psycho. And I don't think he will be seeing any awards love for it, just because of the bias of superhero movies, but he should be nominated for what he did in this movie. His performance in this was even better than in the original trilogy he was a part of.
So that is a good segue to talk about the villains in this movie. The villains from the Sam Raimi movies and the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies. So I will have to say, agree to disagree about William Dafoe being nominated for an Oscar for this movie. I think if he didn't get nominated for an Oscar for Lighthouse, then people are just never going to give that man an Oscar. So I think he was really good. And I definitely think in this movie, I was a little bit more fearful of him than I was in the original Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire, because in this one, I think he's a little more scary. He's a little more intimidating. I think even physically, he kind of holds his own a little bit more. There's a scene where Tom Holland's Spider-Man and him are kind of going at it and punching each other. And, Green Goblin is just taking all the punches and then just throwing Tom Holland's Spider-Man through multiple floors of a building. And he really seemed a lot more physically intimidating all these years later in this movie than I think he did in the original Spider-Man.
Yeah, and just so we know, it's Willem, not William. Common mistake. But no, I think he was phenomenal. And Willem Dafoe he has gotten Oscar love recently. He was nominated for Florida Project. He was nominated for when he played the painter, whose name I forget, with the guy with the one ear. So he's been getting a lot of love. I know your love for that Lighthouse director guy who also did The Witch. I know that overclouds everything, because I know that's like your favorite director.
He is one of my favorite directors these days. Robert Eggers has a new movie coming out in 2022 called The Northman. Just had a trailer drop recently, which, I'm sure we'll talk about when that comes out, but one of the brightest young directors working today.
And go. But yeah, so I think Willem Dafoe's performance was that good. I mean, I enjoyed it. And then to jump on the other villains, Doc Ock was featured heavily in this, which granted he was, because I think a lot of people hold Spider-Man 2 up as one of the greatest comic book movies ever made. Underutilized, I feel Lizard was underutilized, and maybe because that movie didn't go over as well originally, so we didn't get to see a lot of Reese Ifans like outside of his Lizard whatever. I like seeing the actual actor. Same with Thomas Hayden Church. He was always the CGI sand guy. You only really got to see Thomas Hayden Church in the end as Thomas Hayden Church. And, Jamie Foxx obviously got a lot of screen time because it's Jamie Foxx. You're going to give Jamie Foxx your screen time in one of these movies.
Yeah, so, I will have to say, in terms of my favorite kind of villain or villain performance, what have you, in the movie, I have to give it to Alfred Molina's Doc Ock instead of Willem Dafoe's, really emphasized at this time, Green Goblin, because again, it was just such a treat to see him return. I think he did a really good job with his part as well. And a lot of these villain characters are picking right back up from the story in their own respective movies. So it's almost like we never skipped a beat when we see Doc Ock appear and his motivations and what he says. And it just, Alfred Molina is just always great in what he does. And, Doc Ock, I think Doc Ock was given some great action scenes, and it just, overall, I liked him a little bit more than the Green Goblin in this movie. I just thought he was like more compelling and, definitely kind of, for me, I was on the edge of my seat maybe a little bit more with him than some of the other villains, not to say that they weren't great either. So moving on to, some of the other villains, what did you think a little bit more kind of in depth about, let's say, Jamie Foxx's Electro?
I thought it was good. His Electro didn't really feel like the same character from Amazing Spider-Man 2. Like in Amazing Spider-Man 2, he was a nerd who got the powers or whatever, became a bad guy. And in this one, it did seem like he was more cool, more suave, more debonair in this one than he originally was. So that I didn't really see the full connection between the two versions of his villain. Still enjoyed it because it's Jamie Foxx. I'm a big Jamie Foxx fan. So apart from that, yeah, Lizard I think was underutilized, but I guess with 6 villains, you're going to underutilize some of them, and Lizard was the one that got the short shaft on that.
Yeah, I think when you're juggling this many characters in a movie, especially this big blockbuster where everyone has to have their moments and their bits of action or their big pieces of dialogue, I think some people are going to get maybe underutilized a little bit. I think Lizard was one of those, but it was still nice to see him with the other villains and interacting and in the same space, and it was just really cool to still see that on screen. So I'll agree with you on that. And I also agree about Jamie Foxx's Electro. It definitely did seem like a little bit of a different version, even after he became Electro in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Him as Electro in this still felt different from that. Not even like when he was the nerd character starting out at the beginning of Amazing Spider-Man 2. It did feel like a little bit different. It felt like maybe Jamie Foxx playing Jamie Foxx, but it was still enjoyable. And I think it was really interesting to have him in this universe kind of dealing with the arc reactor technology. I thought that was a nice little wrinkle about how Electro could take advantage of that.
Right on. Yeah, I mean, like you said, 5, 6 villains, juggling them is going to be tough. But let's jump ahead to the ending of the movie now, because now you have this reverse of the spell, and everybody has to forget who Spider-Man is and all that. And so the end, with MJ and his best friend, they forget who he is, which is kind of plot holy, I guess, because does he not go to the school? Did they forget who Peter Parker is? Maybe I need to see it again to maybe smooth out those rough edges of the story that I didn't maybe get on the first viewing. So do you think, obviously it's going to be reversed, because at some point MJ will remember Peter Parker. She still had the necklace on that Peter Parker gave her and everything. So I guess, where do you think it goes from here?
Yeah, I'm excited to see where they go with this, because I really hope that Sony and Marvel kind of keep up this partnership and keep making these pretty good Spider-Man movies with Tom Holland in them, because I think where they kind of left him at the end, I'm excited to see where he goes from here, because again, he's rocking the new red and blue kind of classic suit now. It's almost kind of like Spider-Man is going to be in college in New York, kind of on his own, kind of starting fresh from ground zero. He doesn't have Aunt May anymore. He doesn't have MJ or his BFF. He's kind of starting from the ground up again. And I think that's a really good kind of place to find a Spider-Man, because he kind of did everything he could in the MCU already with scale, with battling aliens and saving the universe and doing all this different stuff. So I think it's a good idea to kind of start him from the ground again and kind of have him battle some street level crime and some villains who maybe aren't trying to blow up the world, but still just battle some classic bad guys. So I'm excited to see where they go with it from here.
Yeah, I can't really say it any better than that, because I have no idea what they'll do, but I do believe they're going to make it. MJ will remember him at some point. His best friend, I forget his name, they will remember him at some point. It's just inevitably going to happen, because it kind of has to.
I'm going to disagree with you there, because I think their story, like Aunt May's, have kind of been wrapped up with this Tom Holland Spider-Man trilogy, where you may get red-headed Mary Jane Parker or some other characters who kind of, or a Harry Osborn, a new best friend that kind of come in. Like, again, it seems like this is kind of a soft reset button for Spider-Man. So it really seemed like to me that this was going to be it for them, that I don't really think you're going to see Zendaya come back, or Ned Leeds, or these other characters that he kind of carried over from Spider-Man Homecoming. I think you're going to see a fresh start. And I may be wrong, but it really seemed like to me that this was kind of the swan song for those characters, that they were going off to MIT and that they were going to part ways. And I think they were going to kind of hit a little bit of a reset button, which, I'm excited for.
So to switch it up, we'll talk about the post-credit scenes now. And the first post-credit scene there was the Tom Hardy scene in the diner, and then so it seemed like Tom Hardy is out of the MCU now, but Venom is in the MCU. And I just remember, I don't know if you saw Let There Be Carnage at theaters or all, but when I saw it, that was a big cheer moment when Venom and Tom Hardy, when he was in the MCU officially. These movies were separate from the MCU. They were Sony-only movies. And then that post-credit scene of Venom Let There Be Carnage showed the blip almost or whatever, and everything was changed for Tom Hardy's Venom. And then you're like, oh, sweet, Tom Hardy's in the MCU. We're going to get his Venom in the MCU with Spider-Man. And then this post-credit scene was Tom Hardy going back because the spell reverted everybody back to their original universes, but it left that little piece there. So I was like, you get a little bummed out because you're like, man, I wanted to see Tom Hardy in the MCU. I wanted to see everything connect, but I guess it makes way for a new Venom in the MCU.
Right. And, if you're a big fan of Tom Hardy's Venom, personally, I could kind of take it or leave it. But yeah, he did kind of get blipped in and blipped out really quick. If you were really hoping to see him and Tom Holland's Spider-Man fight, might be a little out of luck with that. Who knows? They could blip him back in or something. It's like writing. But yeah, so basically he appeared. He had a little bit of a funny exchange with the bartender about stuff going on in the MCU universe, and then left a little bit of Venom. So I think we're going to get an MCU version of Venom, because I think Sony and Marvel kind of want to have their own separate universes, maybe share some stuff to kind of, keep them a little bit connected. But yeah, I definitely think we're going to get a different version than Tom Hardy's Venom, which I'm excited for because I think Venom's a cool character, and, getting a different version, couple different versions running around is more to like. Someone who doesn't like Tom Hardy's version that will like the MCU version, and vice versa. I think it kind of gives people options about if they like Venom but don't like one version of the character, that there's going to be another choice for them.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, exactly. Venom is supposed to be a bad guy, and obviously in the Tom Hardy stuff, he hasn't really been a bad. He's the hero of those movies. So perhaps the MCU will bring it back and make it more of a dark bad guy type character. So it'll be very interesting to see where they go with that. So to jump ahead to the second post-credits scene, which wasn't really a scene, it was just a new Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness teaser trailer. And so once again, you're more steeped in comic book stuff, and there was a black and white or whatever gray Doctor Strange in the trailer. Again, my theater erupted with applause. I sat there like, oh, cool, yeah. Who is that?
So this doesn't really have to do with comic books so much as the Marvel Disney Plus show What If. And I didn't really watch that, but I kind of knew of it and what was going on. And basically there's an episode where a version of Doctor Strange kind of goes off the rails a little bit, where he wants to be with his lady, and basically fate keeps happening where she keeps perishing. And he kind of goes to the ends of the earth to absorb as much magical power as he can to try to save her and his universe, and ultimately fails, but then comes back to help save the multiverse, I think later in the show. Not entirely sure, but basically I got the sense that that was that evil version of Strange that's kind of power hungry and absorbed all these different magical powers from across the multiverse, and maybe has a little bit more nefarious motivations than the true Benedict Cumberbatch good Doctor Strange.
Right on. Okay, sounds good. I mean, the trailer looked good and everything, and so I guess with that we can kind of launch into, are you excited for what's to come from the Marvel Universe?
Well, just wrapping up Doctor Strange really quick, I will say some of the MCU stuff for me lately has been hit or miss with some of the shows, some of the movies. I just haven't really felt compelled to check some of them out, and that's okay. It's not going to be for everybody, but the ones that I am excited about, I am really excited about. And I've always been a fan of these kind of magic-based superheroes, because with magic, like, the writing can go anywhere. You can do anything with the story. You can have anything happen, all these crazy visuals. So I will say I am really looking forward to the Doctor Strange sequel. Hopefully somebody will make Wanda answer for what she did with holding that entire town hostage. I can keep hoping for that one day that that'll happen, that someone will hold her accountable for holding that entire town hostage. But, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to the next Doctor Strange movie. Obviously, that's a Sam Raimi film, and Sam Raimi, obviously, Evil Dead, but obviously the original Spider-Man trilogy. So to get him back into a superhero filmmaking is exciting, and I'm looking forward to what role Bruce Campbell will play in this movie, because Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi they go hand in hand. I love both of them. And from there, yeah, we got a lot of good Marvel movies coming up. We got the Ant-Man sequel. There's going to be more Spider-Man. You got another Thor movie with Natalie Portman coming back. So I actually am optimistic about where we're going with this, because I'll be honest with the Eternals, I was a little disappointed because it didn't feel like there was any connective tissue at all to the other movies. A slight reference here, a slight reference there. So that one kind of disappointed me. But with the movies coming out, we're going to see a true continuation of that first chunk of movies. And that's what I'm genuinely excited for.
So thank you to everybody for watching this very first episode of Mitch and Brad's Movie Show. Very proud to have it and put it on for you. So hopefully we contributed a little bit of something different to the discussion about some of these movies and kept the conversation interesting. So thank you again for watching, subscribing, listening. If you're watching on YouTube, do all the YouTube things, leave a comment, a like if you enjoyed the content. So we'll be coming to you every week, with fresh stuff, new movies, old movies that we'll be talking about. We're going to be all over the place. We're going to be on social media, so feel free to engage with us there. So just thanks again for engaging with us. And we'll be back again next week with a very musical episode. Brad, if you want to elaborate on that.
So next week we will be discussing West Side Story, the remake and the original. And I'll give my little closeout as well, just for the first episode, is, thank you so much for watching or whatever and listening. Obviously follow us. If you do like it, or if you don't like it, if you have anything at all, throw down a comment, because we'll monitor it. Even if you want to tell us, how fat we look, I can take it. We're good with that.
So thanks for everybody for watching, listening, whatever platform you're engaging with us on, and we really appreciate it. And we'll see you again next week. Fresh episode Wednesdays, 7 a.m. on whatever platform you watch, listen to. So we really appreciate it, and we'll see you next week.